Right now, let's get into our first big story. The first 100 days in office is usually rocky for many presidents across the world, and the United States is no exception.
But none of the country's past president has had a ride as bumpy as Donald Trump, as he marks his first 100 days on April the 29th. That's coming up tomorrow. Edith Atele tells us more.
It crossed a lot of lines.
Donald Trump is the 45th president of the United States of America. His record victory at the November 2016 polls ushered in a Republican regime in Washington. There and then, many ardent followers of political developments in the U.S. began waiting patiently to see him implement many of the campaign promises that gave him an edge over Hillary Clinton. The plan for the first 100 days in office as president was the focal point of the Trump campaign in Pennsylvania, where he popularized the Make America Great Again slogan.
We are going to make America great again.
Cleaning up Washington, protecting American workers, and restoring the rule of law were his strong points. He also laid out his plan for working with Congress to introduce 10 pieces of legislation that will repeal Obamacare, fund the construction of a wall at the southern border, and more. As Trump's 100 days in office draws near, his approval ratings have continued to drop, hitting a historical low of 42%. An average of 42% of Americans approved of Trump's performance as president, while 53% disapprove. Polls on past presidents' ratings averaged 69% approval and 19% disapproval by their 100th day in office. Trump's predecessor, Barack Obama, had a 69% approval rating and a 26% disapproval rate. Trump's only predecessor, who had ratings as low as his, was former President Bill Clinton, who had 55% approval. The highest approval rating for the first 100 days in the White House was achieved by John F. Kennedy, who had 71%. But despite the deplorable results, 96% of those who supported Trump in the keenly contested November 2016 presidential election say they still stand by their votes. That means it is not all a tale of woes for President Donald Trump. Trump has also made some bold moves in the global sphere. Rhetoric between Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in recent times have been heated over the latter's missile testing and the U.S. military exercise in South Korea. Both leaders have been talking tough and issuing threats that have left many wondering how it will all end.
We have a very big problem in North Korea, and as I said, I really think that China is going to try very hard and has already started.
All right, thanks for staying with us on TVC Breakfast. We're getting into the discussions now proper. We have joining us right now in the studio, public affairs analyst Achike Chude. Good morning.
Yeah, morning.
It's good to have you join us now.
It's always a pleasure. Thank
Great.
you.
And we have a veteran CNN anchor and Emmy Grammy winner, Jim Clancy, joining us on Skype from Atlanta in the United States. Jim, good morning.
Good morning to you, Mike Busel.
Thank you. Good morning.
And we'll later be joined by global affairs analyst Collins Nweke from Brussels in Belgium. But Jim, let me start with you here, Jim. Under 100 days in office of President Donald Trump, the concept of fake news has become very prominent. Can you make us know, is there anything really like fake news?
Well, there certainly is. I mean, there's propaganda. Sabotage the campaign of Hillary Clinton, false stories about her. But when we talk about fake news and Donald Trump in the same sentence, we can safely say that Donald defines fake news as news that he doesn't like. And that is news that is critical of his policies or his lack of policies. And so it has different meanings to different people, but does it exist? Well, it certainly does. As we measure 100 days, you can bet there's going to be plenty of fake news out there on all sides. Back to you, Mike.
All right, but that's not responsible for the lowest rating he's had so far in terms of acceptance. He has just 41%, the lowest so far in the history of U.S. Why is that, Jim?
Well, you know, he's a polarizing president, and he has low rate. His base, those people who support point that President Donald Trump really doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. He doesn't know what's going on in North Korea. He said that NATO could be scrapped. And then he turned around and said, well, maybe NATO's useful. And then he said, well, you know, when I was doing my real estate deals in New York, we didn't talk much about NATO. And now he says that NATO is very important to the United States of America. So we see a Donald Trump that is learning. His supporters out there are not embarrassed at all. They say, fine, let's let him learn. 100 days is not a landmark for them. They still support Donald Trump. And his critics, well, since day one, they have not. And they point out to his real inexperience here as an embarrassment to the United States. This isn't something that's going to go away anytime soon, and it's not going to be measured just by popularity polls.
All right, Jim, we'll come back to you shortly. Achike, let me come to you on this. President Trump has never really been in politics until now. A lot of people still feel that he doesn't have the experience that is required for the president of the world, if I have to put it that way.
Well, just like Jim said, he's definitely going to learn on the job. And of course, there are some things he didn't know and didn't understand about politics, both domestic and international. You know, so, and then of course, his rise to power is something that amazed a lot of people in the world. And that is why there's so much, you know, attention towards Donald Trump. But one thing I have always known is that American democracy did not start today. It's been on for hundreds of years. Over that period of time, institutions have been built, you know, and so it was not always something that was going to be easy for Donald Trump to just come in there and then ride roughshod over institutions and all of that. And you see that even in his first few attempts to fulfill some of the major promises, campaign promises he made to American people, he realized that America was bigger than he, you know, and so the way he ran his businesses, he realized that there were obstacles, you know, democratic obstacles that were on his path. You have the courts that are powerful, that also had their own opinion about what they felt constituted the law. You also had a, you know, a Congress that, you know, has been there for so long, that also knows limits and has been able to define, you know, certain limits within the political sphere of the United States and so on. And so you see, even though they have a majority in Congress, you realize that when it comes to specific campaign promises that he made, for instance, the issue of Obamacare and the rest, there were other political considerations that were also important to Congress members, you know. And so Trump suddenly found out that this is not exactly what you know, he expected, and that's why I said, you know, it's going to take time. He's going to be, over time, he's going to be much more circumspect. Okay. He's going to be very careful when he wants to do certain things, you know, because he realizes that some of these things eventually end up embarrassing him, you know. So there are no two ways about it. He's going to learn. He's learning. You know, and the fact that he has this kind of rating is simply because of that inexperience.
Let's hope he's learning. Let's go back to Jim now. Jim, experts have wondered if this Trump administration has a specific direction. Take, for instance, the infighting in the White House, fightings between Republican operatives and some business leaders, or issues of family. And where is the administration going precisely?
Well, you know, he's having a correctly said there. He's learning that he's got not just one GOP, he's got several. He's got conservative wings, and he's trying to balance all of this. The conflicts of interest. Now the focus on his former national security advisor, his payment from Russia Today, the television channel, all of this coming into question. And it could pose embarrassments. It's certainly making for bumps in the road. Donald Trump has learned that issues like health care just aren't that easy to tackle. You know, the Republican and bring it into 100 days. Doesn't look like they'll be able to do that. But on the other hand, the administration has signaled it might want to go into direct talks with North Korea in order partners like China, like South Korea, certainly, in Japan, two nations that are close allies and have a lot of ties in the region, wanted them right there with the United States. What the North Koreans have always wanted is direct talks with the United States. And Donald Trump, with his own unique style, may be able to give that to them. We're going to have to wait and see how it turns out, though.
All right, Jim, what would you say in 100 days, what would you say are the achievements of President Trump so far?
Well, there's not many. He's had a lot of what we call it President Barack Obama for all of his executive orders and said that, well, he was perhaps going to do away with them. He hasn't. He has put forward a bold tax plan, a tax plan that's come in for a lot of criticism from the left as something that really favors the wealthy and could, in fact, not only lead to higher taxes the grandchildren of Americans today to pay for these tax cuts for the very wealthy in the United States. Their tax cuts are clear. So you have these bold plans that are out there, but you know, it's not as easy as saying we're going to do away with Obamacare on day one. Maybe that's his biggest accomplishment in the first 100 days.
All right. Talking about the achievement of Donald Trump, why has many of the executive positions yet unfilled? About 553 of them really key appointments requiring Senate approval. Why is it stalling?
Because they don't know who to hire. The team that Donald Trump has put together is a unique team. It is largely built from very wealthy individuals who are outsiders to Washington. There's a lot of Americans who like that, but at the same time, they don't have those networks of friends within government that would enable them to get some of those appointments filled. And it's one of the major challenges now that's going to face this administration. Donald Trump, in his first 100 days, has tried to really focus on things like the wall along the Mexican border. That hasn't happened. Doesn't look like it is going to happen. We're going to hear less and less talk about that from on some of those rather boring but really important issues, like who are the U.S. attorneys general that are going to be all across the United States to enforce U.S. laws? Who's going to do those jobs? He hasn't filled any of those positions after Trump. Part of the work was easy. You can fire people. But Donald Trump is finding it much harder to put people on his team, people who want to work with Donald Trump. That'll be the challenge going ahead.
All right, Jim, let me stay with you here. Some time ago, President Trump referred to the media as the enemy of the people. Now, since then, how has the Americans trusted or otherwise the media in America or even anywhere in the world? Has that had any impact so far?
Donald Trump has been, I think, one of the great motivators of American journalism. We're seeing journalism, the likes of which hasn't appeared. We have a major newspaper war underway between the New York Times and the Washington Post. Donald Trump is within the media to confront him on so many different issues. And in doing so, they are trying to pluck out intelligent, investigative journalism and confront some of the issues that this administration isn't willing to talk about. The popularity of the news media, it wasn't popular long before Donald Trump. It had lost credibility long before Donald Trump.
All right.
News. Go ahead.
Okay, let's talk about North Korea, really. Some have said they're just big words. What Donald Trump says, if China won't help, that U.S. would deal with North Korea by itself. Can it take on that big job? Or are Americans ready for the outcome of this attack if it does happen?
Well, you know, it's way too early to talk about an attack. We realize something, and I've covered South Korea along the DMZ number one priority of Kim Jong-un is regime preservation. He has always wanted talks with the United States in order to guarantee that the Kim dynasty will stay in place. He doesn't want to do anything that is going to threaten his rule, his regime. And I think that the U.S. consideration that it might go into direct talks with North Korea is a positive sign. I don't think that Donald Trump is going to be negotiating that on Twitter. At least I hope not, because this is where the problem.
All right, Jim Clancy, veteran CNN anchor and Emmy Award winner. Thank you for talking to TVC News.
Pleasure to be with you both. Have a great day.
And you too. Thank you.
All right, let's come back home now. Actually, you've been following the president. I remember we were here analyzing during the election and all of that. And since then, I know you've been following what's going on. But Jim just mentioned the issue of using Twitter. A president who decides to sideline traditional media and decides to take on Twitter to pass on his message and reach out to people, what perception does that really give out? Or what does it emit? What does it bring out?
Well, it worked for him. He's president. He started the Twitter, issue before the election itself, and he was elected the president. But, I can tell you that a lot of people were beginning to hope that the Trump before the election and the Trump after the election, that there will be a change, especially with regards to what it does with Twitter. When you are a private citizen running for an election, going for an election, yes, you should also be careful, how you use social media. But at that particular point in time, it is critical that you use it properly. I mean, to advance your political, ambition, but when you become president, then it becomes a completely different thing.
It does not make the job of his handler more difficult, because talking about North Korea,
it does.
He came up with a statement on the Twitter page, and for the press secretary to come out and say something else. How do you manage? How would you manage that?
It does, seriously. In fact, a lot of people were thinking that some of, this ability to use Twitter will be taken off him. But obviously that has not worked because there's always, especially for a president that is as rambunctious as Donald Trump, who could fly off the handle, and talk off the cuff. There's always the possibility that there could be one or two gaffes, in the process that could end up embarrassing himself and the administration.
Yes.
Even the very best of politicians sometimes make these gaffes. And for somebody like Donald Trump with his temperament and so on, it is really a nightmare situation. And he has continued. And of course, we've seen a few folks pass since he became president. So I agree with you that it's not something that a lot of his handlers are exactly comfortable with. But then he's the commander-in-chief, he's the most powerful person in the world. How do you take away, the Twitter handle from him? Yeah.
Well, all right, we'll come back to this.
That's a big question.
It's a big one. It's really a big one. And it's a big challenge also for the handlers, because they have to be reactionary every time.